Welcome to the Money Over 50 podcast, brought to you by Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue from Money Over 50 Financial Advisors. This information is general in nature and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Therefore, you should consider whether the information is appropriate for you and your personal circumstances. If you require personal advice, please contact Money Over 50 Financial Advisors. Here are your hosts, Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue.
Welcome to Money Over 50. Today, Michael's here to tell us why you shouldn't spread your eggs.
So, yeah, don't spread your eggs, figuratively speaking,
Yes.
of course.
I always find that, when people say, who's spreading their eggs at home?
True.
Who's got one in the fridge here and one back in the cupboard somewhere, and one in the hallway cupboard? And it's not how it works.
You hardly ever literally do that.
No,
do you?
that's right.
Yeah, literally. There's so many things. Like who actually literally flies by the seat of their pants? You know what I mean? So there's all these sayings out there.
Yeah. Okay, what would that even
And
look
you actually,
like?
you actually have to spell it out.
Yeah.
You feel compelled to spell it out that
Yes.
you're speaking
Figuratively
or metaphorically as opposed to literally.
Yeah.
But in this case, of course, I am. So I hear this quite a bit. So for some reason, existing clients, and these are existing clients of mine, or new clients, but generally speaking, where the plan has actually worked, and it's exceeded the assumed rate of return of 8%, and the people are funding the plan by putting in the money to their superannuation on a fortnightly basis. They're getting the tax returns, and everything's working. There's dips, there's years that there's negatives, and there's years that there's positives, and they've come all through that. And 5 years in, they're ahead of where they're expected to be. And then they state, should we actually spread our eggs and buy a rental house or something like that, or a rental property to spread our eggs? And it got me to thinking that you might be able to speak on the psychology of this, because if a plan's working,
I have a theory.
Sometimes we, but before that, what I was actually going to say is, when a plan is working and you are spread anyway, and you are with our plans, you're spread across 1,700 of the deepest, most diversified, profitable companies in Australia and the world. Don't forget that even though your $1 million super balance is presented on a single piece of paper, you're more than diversified. So if you spread amongst those 1,700 companies of Australia and the world's largest company, and assuming an even money spread in this $1 million example, and it's not exactly how it works.
No.
It's great for illustration purposes. So you have $1 million spread across those 1,700 companies. You actually only have $588.23.
Is that the figure?
In every single company.
Yeah.
So tell me that that's not diversified.
Yeah.
I think the issue is that it comes to you on one piece of paper, or even worse, it comes to you. It pops up on your iPhone
as one number.
Yeah. And it's really, really hard to see a 7-digit number, as in $1 million.
Yes.
It's really, really hard to see that you only have $588.23 cents in each of those 1,700 companies. And look, I'll argue with anyone any day of the week that that's not diversified, and your eggs aren't spread. So further, I told Dallas to give me a long runway.
I'm going to write myself notes here to time me in later, but I don't want to interrupt your role.
So further, buying a rental property is generally done outside of superannuation. Now, what's the best place to build up one's retirement savings? It's superannuation, bar none.
Anyone who's listening to this podcast for any amount of time should know that that's
bar none.
Yep.
So let's go through it again. A couple retiring in 2022 can have up to $3.4 million combined, so $1.7 million each, in a tax-free company that we know to call superannuation. We know it as a tax-free company.
Yeah.
Once they've retired over the age of 60, we know it to be a tax-free company. You can have $3.4 million per couple, or $1.7 million per single person. So bar none, that's the best place to build up retirement savings.
Yeah.
So why 10 years out or 5 years out from retirement when it makes sense for most people to be unwinding property positions, why would you actually enter into a property that you'd have to fund by debt?
Yep.
Generally speaking, well, you would have to fund by debt because if you had $1 million sitting outside of your superannuation fund, we'd say,
what are you doing?
What's it doing there in cash? It should be inside.
Yeah.
So look, we see many new clients. I spoke to new clients who are podcast listeners just last night. And they had rental properties, and we talked about, okay, it would make much more sense to unwind these positions, pay off the debts, and get the equity, basically what they have in that of their own money, get that into superannuation, and get that into a tax-free environment that you're going to have in a mere number of years. So it's a strange thing, and I think the problem is that people can't conceptualize that over $1 million of money can be spread where your holdings are $588.23 if it were evenly spread amongst those 1,700 companies. Look, I'll just put one little legal disclaimer in there. It's not evenly spread.
No.
Look, the larger companies get a bit more of a slice of that pie. However,
it's still the concept.
It's the concept.
There's 1,700
it's the concept.
companies
You own 1,700 companies, and the larger companies should get more than the smaller companies.
So can I interject? So I got a few thoughts. The first one is, I think you've nailed a point there that I hadn't really realised, is that the problem is it comes on one sheet of paper. Like, imagine if the annual return that you got from a super fund had a copy of your share certificate in each of those companies. You'd get a stack of paper, 1,700 pages high, and every page would say, you own X amount of shares in this company, which as of this date is worth this amount of money. Next page, you own this amount of shares in this company, which is, as of this date, is valued at this amount. Next page. You sit there and think about how long you would have to sift through
all that,
1,700 pages. That's how diversified you are. Think about how thick 1,700 pages is. You'd use it to hold your roof down.
Absolutely.
It's a huge amount of diversification. So I think that's a great point, is that you see one number, one thing, which is Sun Super or Colonial First State or MLC or Australian Super, whoever your super fund is, send out a sheet of paper, and there's all extraneous sort of stuff off to the side which people sort of disregard and just look for that number at the front which says 1,342,000, $621.13, and they go, right, that money's with Australian Super. No wonder they go, I've got to diversify. I can't have one person holding all this money. It is, I think, that thing where we don't understand what's going on behind the scenes, and it is because of that it makes sense to. It's actually a rational thing. If you think of it that way, you go, if you had one mate that think of it as if you had 1,700 friends that you'd lent $500 to, some of them are probably going to not pay you back, but you go across the board, you're probably going to be fine. But if you had one friend that owed you $1.3 million, you'd be really nervous about that. You'd be really nervous about that mate's liquidity. So I think that's probably the first point to make there, is to explain that money is within Sun Super or Australian Super, whoever your super fund is. It's being administered by them, but it's not invested in them. It's not linked to their fortunes, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And look, that's a good point. First of all, I'd like to point out, I love that 1,700 share certificates idea, because the listeners, you'll be able to conceptualize having 1,700 sheets of paper stacked up on top of each other. What does a printer take in a, like, if you throw
a ream of paper 250?
Is it 250? Let's assume it's 250 paper. So you get a ream of paper that you put into the printer. So just picture many of those stacked up.
Seven of them. Seven reams of paper.
7 reams of paper. Assuming there are 250 pages. I think that might be. those stacked up on a desk.
Yes.
So that's effectively, and that's a share certificate for each one of the companies that you're invested into that you hold $588.23.
Yeah, and then that company
culminating in $1 million.
That's showing us one sheet of paper. What actually happens is, that sheet of paper says you are invested in X amount of shares in Woolworths. Woolworths has 3,000 outlets. Everywhere that you drive around, you see a Woolworths. That's you are a part owner of all of those different outlets, and the Dan Murphys and the this and the that and all the rest of it. So.
The second part, so I love that. The second part of that, you touched on a good point there, and I missed that point, and it's a point that's come up with people before, is that people assume that there's some sort of risk in investing into a fund that's administered by a Colonial First State or a Sun Super or an Australian Super or you name what sort of pooled super fund. Pooled super fund, what we're talking about there is it just pools the different investors' monies together.
Yep.
Any type of trust like that is actually held in trust for the investors or the members, which are known as unit holders.
Yes.
So, for example, if your $1 million was split into unit prices of $1, you'd have 1 million units in that particular fund. You're a unit holder, I'm a unit holder, everyone else that's in that fund is a unit holder. Now, collectively, whatever money is in that fund is ours.
Yes.
So if somehow the larger superannuation fund that's actually administering that in trust for the members, if they racked up millions or billions of dollars of creditors somehow, those creditors wouldn't legally be able to get to those those funds. Yeah. And the way that I like to conceptualize that is using property, ironically.
Yeah.
If you had 5 rental properties with LJ Hooker, that's a great point. So what happens is that you're actually not invested into the local LJ Hooker
branch.
They're just making it easy for you to manage those properties. So you're the legal owner of that.
Yep.
If that local branch goes out of business or racks up creditors, those creditors can't legally attack your houses.
Yes.
You're hiring them for it to do a job, and it's no different with a pooled superannuation fund. You're effectively hiring them to do a job for you.
Yep.
You're hiring them to do the tax reporting. If you're in pension phase, you're hiring them to pay you out when you need payouts. Do the internal tax credits, claiming those franking credits back, and to diversify your money across those, whatever those companies are. Let's hope it's 1,700. Their job is purely they're hired help.
Yes, and
you're actually not invested into or through them, which is not a not an insignificant point, because that's one of the things that comes up as well.
That's a really good analogy to use there. Is the rental manager for your property. Like you don't want your rental manager for your property to go broke, because then you've got the hassles of going and finding someone else. But you're never at all worried that if they go broke, creditors are going to come in and take your property.
That's right. Yeah. So again, you use that example. If you got $1 million in Sun Super and Sun Super goes broke, well, your $1 million still exists. You just have to get out of there, and go into another super fund. You effectively get cut a check, for your $1 million, assuming that someone didn't come in and buy that fund and take over it.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point as to what I think people are worried about there. There's a couple of other things that this touched on. And I've noticed it before, is like you say, it's shown as just one number. Even in case, like I've seen before some super funds that what they do, which I sort of like, but it'd be interesting to take it further, is they'll show your 10 biggest holdings. So for example, if you've got $1 million and half of that is invested in the Australian companies fund, they'll say, okay, your 10 biggest companies, your 10 biggest holdings are of your 500,000. But they still only show it as a percentage thing, and often, and they'll go, 8% might be invested in this company, and 6% in this one, and 3% in this, and down the line. But it only even when they do show that, they only show the 10 biggest. What they don't then show is the other 190 that you are actually exposed to as well.
Yes.
So, I think though that this is a really interesting one, where it's a good problem to have for some of our clients, as we've seen, where we've got a plan there's a nice, neat, smooth line drawn up and to the right, going, okay, well, if your super grows at a projected rate of 8%, this is where you'll get to. And then 3 or 4 years in, company prices have gone up substantially, and often the clients have done a really good job of sticking to the plan, putting in the money they needed to, sometimes putting in more money than they needed to, and because of that, they're above the line. They're above where they thought they'd be in 3 or 4 years' time. It almost feels too easy for people. So I think
that's probably there's a fair bit into it. Yeah,
all I've done is sort of what you told me to do, and this is we're at $200,000 in front of where we thought we'd be. Something's wrong here, and this I guess touches in the point we talk about where all of those rates of return are just a projected average amount. It's not how it works. You don't have that nice, neat, smooth line. You go up. Company prices go up by an above average amount. Your super balance goes above the line of where we thought you'd be. Then there'll be a correction, and it'll come down to either to the line or below the line, and then then there'll be a recovery, and it'll go back above the line. And so it's really the line that you think of, or you draw from $700,000 now to $2 million in 10 years' time. You draw a nice, neat, smooth line, but it's never. That's not how it works. It doesn't grow in that way. So I think when people see those first few years, as we're seeing at the moment, it's almost it's a good problem to have, because people are going, well, this is almost too easy, which is why I often think that sometimes the best thing that can happen with a new client is that in the first 6 months their balance drops, because it's a bit of an inoculation of, okay, this does go up and does go down, and it's sort of par for the course, and we just need to stick to the plan, which is long term, and we need to do this the next 10 years. So I don't know if that is relevant.
I think that's got a lot to do with it as well. I think that it has a lot to do with it. So my father was classic for saying, don't tempt fate. Yeah. So if you're ahead of where you thought you'd be, don't even think that you're doing well. Because if you even think that you're doing well, fate will come and take that away. So I think there's a lot involved in that. I think that people even subconsciously think along those lines. We're ahead of where we thought we would be. This seems too easy, even though we do take $1,500 a fortnight off them, for example, to put into their fund. They think this is too easy, and there must be a harder way to do that.
Yes.
Well, there is a harder way to do that. Yeah. It's to buy a rental property 10 years out from retirement. That makes it so much harder.
Yeah. If you do really try to make it harder, you can go and do that.
You can do that. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be that hard.
Yeah.
And just picture what. So when you look at your statement, just picture what Dallas's point, that 7 printer reams of paper are stacked up on each other, representing 1,700 of the companies that you're invested into share certificates. So if you actually had to go through that, imagine going through that one by one, and going, my $1 million here, I've got $588 in this company. I've got $588 in this company, and you just kept going through that, and like that would be a good thing for people, because you go, I do have my eggs spread.
You'd be, after a day of doing that, you'd go, I never want to look at it again. And yes, I get the concept. I'm doing this one. It's actually interesting. It reminds me of a client of ours from a few years ago who their accountant came in for their meeting, and their accountant was a bit of hard work, for lack of a better way to put it. And when we're talking about, okay, this is what we'd recommend they do with their retirement savings. Some needs to be allocated to cash in case they need to draw an income out, and an emergency, and the rest of it we would just want to be diversified across the biggest 200 companies in Australia and the biggest 1,500 in the world. And for some reason the accountant, it was like he thought it was too easy. He sort of went, well, why do you have to do that? I said, well, again, we want to be really diverse. We want the exposure to these great companies, but we want to be as diversified as possible. And index funds, for anyone who we've talked about this before, it's ridiculously cheap. It's so cheap for someone to do that. Like, if you look at it as, those 1,700, those 7 reams of printer paper, someone has to go and buy and sell those companies.
Yep.
Now, the accountant at the time said, well, why don't you just pick some companies and go and buy some shares for them? And that was, I think, how I should have done. I should have gone and got 7 reams of paper, put them on the table and gone, right, well, this is what the index fund is going to do. They are going to go and buy, they're going to go and transact on this many companies. Now, if you want to go and do that, then sure, you go and buy 1,700 companies, and then you handle the correspondence from each of them and the dividend payments, you collect that. And then when the client wants the money, you sell down a prorated amount of each of those 1,700 companies and mail them the check. You can do all that if you want, or we can just get the fund to do that.
And look, it costs as low as $1 per company per year.
Yeah.
So $1 million in 1,700 companies. Look, an index fund will set you back about 0.17%, as low as that. So that's about $1 per company per year, which is really, really low cost.
Yeah, and it's just an interesting one to think about. I don't think anyone, and this is an accountant, like he should know about what's involved. He has seen people buying and selling shares and the amount of paperwork that's required there, and it is just a way to think about that, as that's what's involved in being that diversified. Is 7 reams of paper, 1,700 sheets of paper, with all of the transactions involved there. So, no, I think that's a great point there, Michael. I think those are for me the 2 bits to wrap up. Is that people, I think, when things work too well too early, people they sort of go, this has got to be something's wrong here. It isn't. It's just that's a natural part of the cycle. Where some years it'll be easier, some years it'll be harder. You know. Yeah. When it goes down by 30%, no one's going, oh, this is too easy. People are going, oh, that's why I get the good returns in those other years, is because I have to ride this out. And then, I think that's the real visual for people to take away from that, is that when you see your statement from your super fund, it's not, you don't have $1 million invested in Sun Super or in now the Australian Retirement Trust is what it's called. Yeah. You don't have $1 million in any of these funds. You've got that money spread right out already.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Money Over 50 podcast with Money Over 50 financial advisors. For more information and resources, visit the Money Over 50 website, mo50.com.au. We look forward to catching up again soon.